Hey everyone, I'm Army Gaming. Welcome back to my channel and welcome to Monster Analysis. Up for analysis today is Jakugan. When King Darren gave the order to execute Haku and Jabline, they came together to create a deadly creature that could defend them, and they succeeded. Jakugan has the best skills of the two and she's ready to take down any king. So as you can see from this monster and from the description, this is basically a combination of Haku and Jabline, and I really hope Social Point continues to do this with other monsters. I hope they take one monster from one element and a monster from another element and basically just fuse them together to create an entirely new monster that has a combination of those monsters' skills and stats, because this is definitely one of the better monsters I've seen in the whole entire game, design wise and skills wise, and also stats wise. Not so much trait, but we'll get into that in a little bit. As of the time recording this video, there are a total of 26 metal legendary monsters, so Jakugan will be compared to the rest of the 25 legendary metal monsters. Starting things off with power, Jakugan has a power of 3,465, which actually puts her in 13th place. And I know that 13th place doesn't seem like a good place to be, but the thing about metal monsters, metal legendary monsters, is that a lot of them tend to be attackers. A lot of them have a power of 3,500 and above, so even though she's in 13th place, this is an extremely good power. As for her life of 27,747, this actually puts her in 16th place along with Annihilator R2. So another thing about metal monsters is that they tend to be really tanky, so that's why her life of 27,000 only puts her in 16th place. And as for her final stat, speed, 3,465, this is an amazing speed. For metal monsters, this is actually the second highest stat. In terms of metal monsters, this actually puts her in 3rd place, because currently Hackster and Sentinel, they hold the highest speed of 3,476. After that speed stat, the next highest speed is 3,465, which Arcade, Annihilator R2, Stinger S1, and now Jakugan have. So overall, compared to other metal legendary monsters, she's extremely fast, her power is pretty high, and her life is rather mediocre. And as for her trait, she's immune to magnetizing. Out of all the traits in the game, this is definitely not one of the better ones. It's almost like she doesn't really have much of a trait. The only time this really helps her out is against metal monsters, and a lot of times the metal monsters you'll actually encounter in player versus player or metal wars, they aren't really going to be monsters that magnetize you and then do a metal attack. The AI isn't that smart. Most of the time it's going to be a deny metal monster that will possess you, stun you, or hack you now. Or of course Timerion, who can do stop timer cooldowns activated against you. So unfortunately, for what appears to be an amazing metal monster so far, this is one of the worst traits she could have. Anyways, now we can move on to skills. For her default we have Metal Kisses, and for a king, nothing interesting there. So let's move on to her special attack, You Are Next. Deals insane metal damage, may make target bleed, removes 50% of stamina from targets. Alright, so this is a metal based attack that deals 90 damage to a single enemy. It'll also give that monster bleeding and reduce their energy by 50%. Overall, I don't think this is a really impressive ultimate. And the two main reasons I think this skill isn't that impressive is because one, it's metal based. This skill could have been immensely better if it was special based, because in Team Wars you're obviously going to face another metal monster, so there could be a situation where this skill doesn't really help you out. Now of course, if it's metal and some other element, you can use the ultimate against the other element, but I don't know, if it was special based, it'd just be way easier to use. The second thing I don't like about the skill is that it only targets a single enemy, so at best you can only eliminate one enemy monster, assuming it's not a metal monster, because if you do use this skill against a metal monster, it's only going to be dealing half the amount of damage. But I guess the upside to that is that you will make that monster bleed and you'll also drain their stamina. Now 50% of stamina drain, that still leaves the possibility for them to actually use an attack. So if you don't actually finish off the monster, specifically if it's a metal monster, they can still get an attack in on you. Which in Team Wars, if it's like a common for the rarity, you could potentially end up losing your common monster. However, assuming you're not using this skill against a metal monster, then this skill is great because you're pretty much going to one-shot whatever monster you attack. Moving on to skills group 1, we have Bleeding Bets, Exhausting Blade, Red Nectar. Nothing interesting here, so let's move on over to skills group 2. The first skill of skills group 2 is called Magnacide. Deals very heavy special damage. This is a special based skill that targets a single enemy, dealing 60 damage. It only costs 28 stamina and it has no cooldown. So starting things off strong, Jakugan has an amazing skill. And oddly enough, I'm going to say, you actually might not need to run this skill. There's nothing much to say about it other than it's amazing, but just wait until you see a skill in skill group 3. Next up is Grace of Jabline. Steals life from target, requires cooldown. This is a dark based attack that targets a single enemy. It deals 50 damage, it has a 25 stamina cost, and it has a 2-turn cooldown. And this skill steals only 50% of life from the enemy target. I really wish this skill would have been 100%, it could have been way better, but it's still 50, which I guess is kind of good. And one thing to note about this skill is that it does deal dark based damage, which is amazing. Jakugan is one of the few legendary monsters to have attacks that are not its own element, in this case metal and dark attacks, and of course special attacks. So a skill like Grace of Jabline will always come in handy against a metal monster, and while it's not as strong as Magnacide that deals 60 damage, you're still going to be dishing out 50 damage and you're going to be stealing 50% of life in case you need it. The stamina cost of this skill is also rather low, but unfortunately it does have a 2-turn cooldown. Overall though, I would recommend running this skill if you're going for an attack for Jakugan. Next up we have Aorta Cut. deals low metal damage, may make target bleed, removes 25% of stamina from target, gains 15% stamina, and requires cooldown. So this skill is a metal based attack that targets a single enemy, dealing only 30 damage, so unfortunately that's rather weak. It costs a high 33 stamina, and it has a fortune cooldown, which is extremely high for what this skill does. I realize this skill has a lot of effects like bleeding, reduces the enemy's monster energy by 25%, and you recover your own energy by 15%, so even though the stamina cost is 33, you're going to be recovering about 20 points, so I guess it's not that bad, but still the cooldown is just immensely high. Honestly, if you were to run this skill, you probably wouldn't have a chance to use it on an attacker Jakugan. There is an argument to be made for this skill on a denial Jakugan, I'll get into that a little later, but as of right now, I can't really recommend this skill too much. Alright, so now we can move on to skills group 3 and check this skill out. Head Crop deals massive dark damage. This skill is a dark based attack that deals 70 damage to a single enemy. It costs 28 stamina and it has no cooldown. Alright, so Head Crop deals 70 damage and it's dark based, whereas Magnesite deals 60 damage and it's special based. If you're forced to pick between running one of these skills, they both have their ups and downs. Obviously, if you ever find yourself in a metal dark war, if you only have Head Crop, well then it's not going to be that effective against a dark monster, but it's still going to be equally effective against a metal monster. If you're running Magnesite in a metal dark war, then Magnesite is going to work well against the dark monster and the metal monster. And now let's take the case of an Earth Metal War. If you ever find yourself in that situation, it is way better to have Head Crop because then you have the elemental dark advantage against the Earth monster. So instead of running Magnesite, it benefits you to run Head Crop. And between both of these skills, I would honestly recommend that you run Head Crop over Magnesite, just because most of the time it's going to be a metal and some other elements. So the only case Head Crop won't benefit you is when you're encountering a dark monster. If that's the case, just don't use Jakugan or use a different monster, or just use Jakugan differently. But if you really can't decide between either of these skills, you could always just run both of these skills and just ignore Grace of Jabline. Let me just talk about the other skills in skills group 3 and then we'll come back to that discussion. So next up is Haku Energy Slash. Deals moderate metal damage, removes 100% of stamina from target, requires cooldown. So Haku Energy Slash is a metal based attack that deals 45 damage, it costs 28 stamina, and it has a high fortune cooldown. And even though the cooldown is pretty high, this skill still drains 100% of energy from an enemy monster, so that enemy monster is essentially going to be denied. Of course, there is a chance they can get that ultimate, but as far as using regular skills, they won't be able to do that. And honestly, even though the cooldown is pretty high, having 4 turns, I don't really mind too much, because if you're using Jakugan as an attacker, most of the time you're only going to really rely on Head Crop to eliminate enemy monsters. Haku Energy Slash is a skill to have like just in case. You know, I always say when an attacker has a deny skill, that's amazing. Most of the time the attacker doesn't need the deny skill, but just in case for whatever reason you need it, it's there, it's usable. And it goes without saying that you should definitely run the skill. If for some reason you can't eliminate the enemy monster in one hit, just run Haku Energy Slash so they can't hurt you, and then on the following turn you can eliminate them with Head Crop. And the final skill in skills group 3 is Jaku Phobia. Deals moderate special damage to all enemies, may make all targets bleed, requires cooldown. Jaku Phobia is a special based AoE that deals 45 damage to all of the enemy monsters. It costs 37 stamina and it has a 3-turn cooldown. And on top of that, it'll make all of the enemy targets bleed. And I gotta say, as far as being an AoE, this is an amazing skill. First of all, it's special based, so regardless of the element of the enemy monster you attack, it's still going to deal the same amount of damage. Next off, it deals 45 damage, which is typically what attacker AoEs tend to have. You know, every once in a while we see an AoE that deals 50 damage or another AoE that deals 55, but 45 is like the standard for AoEs. But on top of that, it also gives bleeding, and currently in the game, no monster is immune to bleeding, of course not counting Totem and Timerion. And bleeding is essentially poison. The enemy's power output is reduced by 19%, and their life is going to be reduced by 10% for the following 4 turns for a grand total of 40%. And it goes without saying that you should definitely run the skill. Can you imagine a Metal Light War, where you start off with Demise, and give a power boost to Jakugan who's running Strength Runes, and then Jakugan use Jaku Phobia, which essentially becomes like a 90 damage AoE, that not only deals 90 special base damage, it also makes all of the enemy monsters bleed in case they happen to survive. That is so darn amazing. Now of course it is an AoE, so the accuracy is 90%, so that may not be the smartest choice, but it is a viable option. And a skill like this is extremely useful for doing player versus player really fast or completing dungeons really fast. So as far as making an attacker Jakugan, which would be a Jakugan that runs 1 speed rune and 2 strength runes, I would recommend running all of skills group 3, Head Crop, Haku Energy Slash, and Jaku Phobia. As for the final skill on an attacker Jakugan, I recommend Grace of Jabline, just in case you need to recover your life for whatever reason. Most of the time you probably won't need to, but just in case, it's better to be safe than sorry. But if you honestly don't want to run Grace of Jabline because you're scared of going up against a dark monster and only having dark based attacks, then I guess you could run Magnesite. I would like to say however that it's not really that bad to not have Magnesite, just because if you were to be in a dark metal war, you could always just use Haku Energy Slash against the enemy dark monster, that way they have no stamina and they can't attack you, and on the following turn you can use Jaku Phobia, and I'm pretty sure that's going to be enough to take out any enemy dark monster, because Jaku Phobia is 45 damage and Haku Energy Slash is 45 damage. So you can make the argument there's no real need to Magnesite. However, if you're comfortable with running Magnesite, feel free to run that instead. Now keep in mind that Jakugan does have an amazing speed of 3,465, thus making her one of the fastest metal monsters. An argument can be made for making her a deny monster. And the only thing about her being a deny monster is that she can only realistically deny one enemy monster for one turn. And in some situations that's all you really need to do. If it's a team wars involving metal, common, and some other elements, it's 2 legendaries against 2 legendaries. If your attacker is faster than the enemy attacker, and your attacker can either deny or eliminate the enemy attacker in one hit, then Haku Energy Slash is really all you need. And there are certainly situations where an off-speed Jakugan can come in handy more so than an attacker Jakugan, so that's ultimately a choice you have to make for yourself. Another thing to keep in mind is that there are so many metal deny monsters, so many great metal deny monsters, that you might not need an off-speed Jakugan, but at the same time there are so many great metal attackers that you don't really need an attacker Jakugan, so just make it to whatever best fit your need. And assuming you do want to run a 3-speed Jakugan, there's a slightly different skill set. The number 1 skill you're still going to need is Haku Energy Slash. Regardless of what kind of build you use, this is a must-have skill. The next skill I would recommend on a denied Jakugan would be Aorta Cuts. And the reason you want to run this skill is because it drains 25% of the enemy's stamina, while at the same time giving the enemy bleeding. So you're doing 3 things. You're reducing the enemy's stamina, you're taking away 10% of their life, and you're reducing their damage output. Keep in mind that an all-speed Jakugan is going to have base power, so when you run a monster with all speed runes, you really want skills that dish out effects or DLTs. So on a denied Jakugan, I would say this is the second must-have skill. And moving on over to skills group 1, even though I brushed through this in the beginning, arguments can also be made for running Exhausting Blade. This skill essentially just removes 20% of stamina from the target. Once again, you're going after effects, not so much damage outputs. And of course, you still want to consider running Jakuphobia because it is an AoE bleeding, which is amazing. And really quickly, I want to talk about Magnesite and Head Crop. Even though I said with the off-speed Jakugan you want to go after skills that do effects or DLT, arguments can still be made for running either of these skills, specifically Head Crop. Head Crop deals 70 damage. A Jakugan with base power against another level 100 monster, this skill would still deal 10,187 damage, which is still a lot. Maybe all you need is that one extra hit to eliminate an enemy monster, which can be the case for running Head Crop. Magnesite on the other hand, since it deals 60 damage, that's equivalent to dealing out 8,731 damage, so you're missing out on 1,300 if you don't run Head Crop. Whereas moving back to Jakuphobia, that initial 45 damage is only going to be 6,548. So Jakuphobia, even though it does give bleeding, it'll probably take about 2 turns for the damage to equal up to what Head Crop does in 1 turn. So that is something to keep in mind if you're going to make an off-speed Jakugan. Once again, I highly recommend Haku Energy Slash and Aorta Cuts. After that, if I was making an off-speed Jakugan, I would personally recommend Head Crop just because it still does deal massive damage even for a monster with base power. As for the final skill, it's honestly up to you. You can run Jakuphobia or Exhausting Blade from skills group 1. And with that being said, that is going to conclude my analysis on Jakugan. Please let me know what you thought about the video, and also let me know what kind of Jakugan are you going to make. Are you going to make an attacker Jakugan or a denied Jakugan? And regardless of which build you make for your monster, let me know what skill sets you're going to be running. And like always, also be sure to let me know what other monster you want to see analyzed. With that being said, I wish everyone the best of luck in Monster Legends. Remember to dream big and pursue your passions.